welcome to the Gordon Current Science and Technology stage. My name is Corrine, and today we're going to talk a little bit about how we can clean our water using nanotechnology. Now, to begin, I want to draw your attention to this cart. I have a tank here. I filled it up right outside the museum in Boston's own Charles River. And I'm wondering if I have any audience members who would be brave enough to drink this water. Anyone want to do that? Anyone? Really? You would want to drink this water? Do you know what's in it? So, how many people in here think it's a good idea to drink Charles River water? Any hands? Most of you guys know it's not. So what if I told you, though, that this man drank water right out of the Charles? His name is Alan Cummings, and he's the CEO of a Vermont startup company that uses nanotechnology to clean water. And we challenged him to put his technology to the test, to use it to clean Charles River water and drink it right in front of us. And he did. And you can see he's just fine. Now, what do you think you would have to do in order to be comfortable drinking Charles River water? So what if I took this sieve here and I just kind of scooped up all the garbage off the top? Now would you be comfortable drinking it? Seeing a lot of shaking heads? Probably not. A lot of people rely on Brita filters at home. Do you guys think that a Brita filter would do a good enough job cleaning Charles River water? Seeing a lot of shaking heads? No. What about a chemical treatment like iodine or chlorine? Would you trust this to clean Charles River water to drink it? I'm still seeing a lot of shaking heads. A lot of people realize that these types of treatments probably wouldn't be sufficient to clean an urban polluted river like the Charles River that runs right through a very highly populated area. You know that all sorts of bad stuff ends up in the river. But what about a river like this? I like to camp up in New Hampshire and Vermont, and I come across these crisp, clean mountain streams, and I'm so tempted to just scoop up a handful and take a sip. Is that a good idea? What do you think? No? A lot of people saying no. And you'd be right, because even though we don't have to worry about chemical pollutants so much up in this area, we don't know what's happening just upstream. For example, these animals aren't very careful about where they put their waste. And it turns out neither are these animals. And there are some nasty little things in animal waste that can make us very sick that we want to keep out of our water supply. What am I talking about? There are a whole bunch of different microbes that cause waterborne disease. This is one of them. This is Giardia. It's a tiny little protozoan parasite, but if it gets in your water supply and into your body, it makes you very sick. Diarrhea, nausea, cramps. It's really quite awful. We also have to be careful about bacteria in our water. This one's E. coli, but there's a lot of other ones that cause diseases like cholera and typhoid. We want to avoid those. And we also want to be careful for viruses. Rotavirus and hepatitis, all sorts of viruses could make us sick if they get in our water supply. And these microbes do make people very sick. Worldwide, about 2 million people every year die from waterborne diseases, and countless others are sickened. The tricky thing, though, is that these microbes are much too small to see. So you can't just tell by looking at your water whether or not it's safe to drink. Not to mention that chemical pollutants, well, we're talking about molecules there. Those are also much too small to see. So that brings us to this question. How can we be sure our water is safe to drink? How can we remove these tiny microbes and chemicals that are much too small to see? Now, the answer to that question depends on who you are and where you live. Now, most of us, we don't need to worry about that. The water that's delivered to your home is safe. All the microbes and chemicals have been removed from it, and usually it's treated at a large-scale water treatment plant. The water here at the museum comes from the Cambridge Water Department, and this is how Cambridge water is treated. It starts about 50 miles west of here, out in the Hobbs Brook Reservoir. And then it travels through a bunch of pipes before it arrives at Cambridge in Fresh Pond. Here's Fresh Pond, and right on the banks you can see our water treatment plant. Now, the Cambridge water treatment plant does a few things to the water. The first thing it does is it adds a chemical coagulant. What that means is it just creates clumps of impurities. It bubbles up air through that water, so we have floating impurities that we can just skim right off the top. Now the next thing they do is they add ozone bubbles. Ozone is a molecule that has 3 oxygen atoms, and it is very toxic to microbes. It kills bacteria, viruses, and protozoa. The next thing they do is they put it through a great big activated carbon filter. You can think about it a little bit like an enormous Brita filter. And then the last step, they add 2 more chemicals to disinfect the water, chlorine and chloramine. Now these chemicals kill microbes, and even though we've already done that in the water treatment plant, these chemicals are important to add because they stay in your water and they keep those microbes out of your water as it travels the miles of underground pipe till it gets to your home. Now that's very typical of a large-scale water treatment plant. The problem though is that all of these large-scale water treatment plants all require a lot of energy, money, infrastructure, and skilled engineers and laborers. Now we're lucky enough to have access to that here, but there are places in this world that don't. And there are situations that we might find ourselves in where we can't rely on treated water. Can someone give me an example? Maybe someone's traveled to a place where you couldn't rely on the drinking water. You had to purify it in some other way. Haiti, that's a very good example. There are a lot of developing countries that struggle with their water supply for a couple of different reasons. The first is that some areas are actually too poor or remote to have access to centralized water treatment. Another problem they may have is in very populated areas that their population is growing at such a rate they actually can't keep up with demand, that they can't build the water treatment plants or lay pipe fast enough to meet this growing need for fresh water. So that's something that a lot of developing countries struggle with. Another thing that actually everywhere in the world struggles with is right after a disaster, like Hurricane Katrina or the quakes we had in Haiti and Japan. Right after a big disaster, utilities shut down. You don't have power, you don't have clean water, so what do? Now, the final situation I want to bring up is the fact that our infrastructure is old. In some cases, the pipes that bring water to your house were put underground more than a century ago. Those old pipes, they sometimes break, they have problems, and sometimes you'll end up with a water main break. That means that the water supply has been compromised and it's unsafe. And last year in Boston, we had a huge boil water order that a lot of communities had to boil their water before drinking it for a few days until the problem was fixed. And these problems will likely continue in the future because we're not replacing our pipes as fast as we need to. So figuring out how we can provide fresh, clean water in situations where we can't rely on large-scale water treatment is a big concern. In these cases, what should we do? Well, the easiest thing we can do is to cart in bottled water. It's convenient, it's portable. I can have clean, safe drinking water just about anywhere. The problem, though, is aside from the fact that the production, transportation, and disposal of these bottles is an environmental nightmare in and of itself, water's really heavy. Think about how much water you use every day. In this area, per capita water use is 50 gallons per person per day. This is a 5-gallon water jug. That means each person uses 10 of these every single day for cooking and cleaning and bathing and watering your lawn and all that stuff. So that really adds up. That would weigh 400 pounds. 400 pounds of water per person. That becomes really difficult to move around. So transporting water isn't very feasible either. So that's why there are researchers that are looking for solutions.